So when it comes to doing step overs and making them more effective, there are a few things we need to get right so that when we perform our step overs, we have more of a chance of beating our opponent. Now, everybody does step overs differently, and I'm not even talking about combinations or doing different type of step overs like reverse step overs and stuff like that. Instead, I'm talking more about the actual style in which a player performs step overs. So for example, I personally like to perform my step overs very short and sharp with more leg movement as opposed to body movement. And that's just the natural way I like to perform step overs. Whereas other players like to perform step overs with more wider leg movement, with wider step overs, which means their body gets more involved when doing step overs. Now, there's no right or wrong way in terms of style. It just depends on what feels more natural to you and ultimately what works for you. But regardless of what style you use, there are some key fundamentals when it comes to making our step overs more effective. So the first thing is we need to keep the ball close to us. And this is pretty obvious. If the ball is away from us or not under our control, then chances are we're probably going to trip over the football, or we just won't be able to do our step overs properly and execute our step overs. And so we want to make sure we keep the ball nice and close to us. Personally, I like to do step overs when I'm touching the ball with every step. So the same way I like to try and dribble with close control by taking a touch of the ball with every step, I'll just add in my step overs when I'm dribbling like that. But I know some players like to roll the ball with more speed and do their step overs. It just depends on what feels best for you and what your goal is as well. For example, my aim when doing step overs is to really slow my opponent down, and I'm not really trying to confuse my opponent with my step overs. It's more to just make me more unpredictable so I can set myself up to use my speed so I can burst away. Whereas other players like to really confuse their opponents, use a lot of body movement and just use their step overs to throw their opponent completely off balance. Players like Robinho and Ronaldinho were really good at these types of step overs where they're almost like body feints in the way they move their body when doing step overs. Whereas players like Cristiano Ronaldo and Mbappe tend to be more leg dominated when they're doing their step overs. So different styles, but the key in both is that we need to keep the ball close to us to execute our step overs properly. Another key fundamental when doing step overs is you need proper foot coordination. Now, a lot of people will actually overlook this because when you do your step overs, it doesn't actually look that complicated in terms of foot coordination. People will just see you swinging your leg around the ball and assume it's really easy, but just swinging your leg around the ball isn't enough for you to effectively beat opponents with step overs. We also want to be very quick and precise, and that comes from having good foot movement and balance, which falls under having good foot coordination. If you ever had times where you've tried to take on someone and you're performing step overs, but they feel very sluggish, they feel out of sync, you're not in sync with your feet, and you just don't feel very convincing with your step overs, those are signs that you need better coordination with your feet. Often players like to jump to improving their speed of their step overs, or just by doing more combinations with speed, when really the problem was actually coordination, because speed follows coordination. And this is something you can apply to any skill or technical thing where it's important to have that muscle memory first and that coordination with your body. And then once you have that, you can then start to add speed and difficulty to the skill. And you can experiment and try this for yourself. Next time you have a training session, don't do any footwork drills or any warm-up drills, and just do a few step overs just as if you're trying to beat someone, and notice how that feels. Then do a few footwork drills, maybe go through some ladders or something, then go back and do your step overs again, and you should notice a huge difference from that. Your steps are going to feel lighter, they're going to feel sharper, you're going to feel you're able to combine more step overs more smoothly, and you're just going to feel more in sync with your feet. And so foot coordination is super important when we're trying to improve our step overs. Of course, a lot of it is to do with our brain just waking up. So before a game especially, you want to make sure that you do, a few footwork drills, but that's pretty standard and obvious. But we also just want to make sure we're doing coordination drills on a weekly basis, and so that we're improving our overall footwork and coordination. But that's basically it for this video on how we can improve our step overs to beat more opponents. By the way, I do have a training program, Community on School. If you want to check it out, I have a 5-part dribbling program on there. Plus, I'm adding drills every month on things like your first touch, your passing, shooting, etc. So you can feel free to check that out. It'll be the link in my bio. But I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you guys next time.